We go ahead and start again. I guess our recording is going now. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Good afternoon, everyone. This is Richard Ift of the Federal Insurance Office. I am joined by a variety of my colleagues today: Sherry Roulette, Annette Burris, John Gudgel, and Ted Newman, or at least some people may be jumping in and out. In addition, Mike McCauley of ISO, who is managing the data portal for Treasury, and Aaron Brandenburg, who is with the NAIC and manages the state data, the coordinated state data call in connection with the terrorism risk insurance reporting, is on as well. So anyway, let's get started. As we're going along, if you have any questions, you can send them through the chat Q&A function. If you direct them to Sherry Roulette, she will see them, and just you can do it anonymously. If you want to send it to everybody, that's fine too. We'll obviously answer as many of those as we can, either as we go along or at the end of the webinar. Also, as you've seen and presumably acknowledged, we are recording the webinar, and we will post it on the website after the fact, basically in the same place where you would have found the link to get into the webinar if you want to review it again, or if one of your colleagues needs to see it and was unable to attend. Again, to get started, as many of you know, this is a required data call under Section 104H1 of the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. It is designed to provide Treasury with a data set that it will use periodically to analyze, among other things, the effectiveness of the terrorism risk insurance program and the competitiveness of small insurers in the terrorism risk insurance marketplace. State regulators collect similar information for regulatory purposes with respect to insurers under their supervision. As has been the case in the past, Treasury and state regulators are coordinating in this effort with a consolidated approach that will allow reporting insurers to provide the same data set to Treasury through ISO and state regulators through a portal operated by New York State. And as a result, insurers can thereby satisfy their obligations to both entities by submitting the same data set to two different locations. And we'll talk a little bit about the mechanics of that a little further along. The regulatory due date for the annual data call is May 15th. So you've still got a month and a half or so. This date was set in light of FIO's statutory obligation to provide a report to Congress by June 30th, which this year focuses upon the effectiveness of the terrorism risk insurance program. If you would like to provide comments on the subject of that study, we did publish in the Federal Register a notice on March 19th, which was the same day as the notice announcing the commencement of the data call was published. The notice for comments identifies various areas of interest on our part in connection with the study this year. The notice is available on our website, where information concerning the data call is also located, which you should be seeing on your screen now. And that notice requests that for the comments, that responses be provided by May 4, 2024. With respect to the data, though, because of this report deadline for us, we are unable to provide any extensions for responses to the data call beyond that May 15th deadline. So please do your best to meet that. Treasury is conducting training webinars for each of the four reporting templates, which are small insurers, non-small insurers, alien surplus lines insurers, and captive insurers. This webinar will address small insurers. This year, a small insurer is defined as including all insurance groups or insurance companies that are not part of a group writing TRIP eligible lines of insurance, which had a calendar year 2022 direct earned premium of less than $1 billion in TRIP eligible lines premium, and a policyholder surplus of less than $1 billion also in 2022. If you are above either of those thresholds for 2022, you're defined as a non-small insurer and actually need to report on the non-small insurer template, which not surprisingly requires the production of more data. But if you are beneath that threshold of 1 billion on both of those measurements, you do file in the small insurer report or reporting form. And just so for future reference, that threshold should remain at under 1 billion through the program's current expiration date in 2027. As you're figuring that out, please keep in mind that if you are an insurer or group that is under the policyholder's surplus limit, but sort of near the cutoff on the premium side of things, certain premium allocated to lines for state reporting purposes is not included in TRIP and would be excluded from your calculations of TRIP eligible lines DEP. So for example, this would include personal lines premium that otherwise gets reported for state purposes in lines such as fire and allied lines, as well as professional liability insurance that gets reported for state purposes under other liability. The form instructions contain a comprehensive list of premium to be excluded, so please evaluate this before concluding whether you should report on the small insurer form or the non-small insurer form, given that the latter does require more information to be reported. The webinar for non-small insurers was held earlier today and will be posted on the TRIP data call website in the near future in case it is relevant to you and you missed it. We will also be holding 2 more webinars tomorrow, one at 11 a.m. Eastern for alien surplus lines insurers, and then a second at 3 p.m. Eastern for captive insurers. I also want to mention that once you determine that you qualify as a small insurer, there is a reporting exception for any small insurers that wrote less than $10 million in TRIP eligible lines premium in 2023. This is TRIP eligible lines premium as defined by TRIA, and would again be excluding premium from areas such as personal lines, professional liability, et cetera. If you are below this threshold, you actually don't need to register or report. However, if you do fall into this category, and particularly if you're sort of near that threshold, it would be helpful if you could notify Treasury and ISO that you are not reporting on this basis. Otherwise, we do some checking to see who at least we think should be reporting, who isn't. And, you know, if you confirm to us in advance that you believe you're exempt given your premium writing status, we can note our records accordingly. Having said that, again, if you are even slightly above that $10 million premium threshold, you will still be required to report. There are no exceptions for being close, but just missing it. Again, no other reporting exceptions or exemptions other than that $10 million TRIP eligible lines DEP figure. Now, as I mentioned, TRIP operates on a group basis, so your reporting should also be done on a group basis. You would only report as an individual company if you are not affiliated with another company writing TRIP eligible lines of business. In addition, remember that any alien surplus lines insurers that might be part of a group should report with that group. So the alien surplus lines insurer template should only be used by alien surplus lines insurers that are not affiliated with either a non-small or small insurer group. The good news for this year for your reporting is there have been no substantive changes to last year's data call. If you have been responsible for your organization's reporting in the past, you should find the process to be essentially identical and straightforward to that which it has been for the last, at least that it was last year. The process to start the reporting is simple. You go to the data collection website page, which is what you see on the screen. And we have a link there to www.tripsection111data.com. Click that, and you're now leaving the confines of Treasury, and you'll come to the data collection portal, which is where you basically download a registration form, which, Sherry, if you cycle down, you'll see at the bottom of the page. Basically download that form, fill it out, email it back to the email address provided, which is tripsection111data@iso.com. and send that back. The point of contact you list on that registration form will receive an email from ISO with a link to a secure portal. Once they've done their processing, that secure portal will contain your required reporting form. We do get quite a few questions from insurers saying they haven't received their reporting templates occasionally. So remember, this is something you do need to do every year. Just because you reported last year doesn't mean you'll get a form without registering again. So each year your organization does need to fill out this registration form and email it to ISO in order to get the required reporting templates. Once you have collected your data and completed the reporting form, you will send it back to ISO through the same secure portal. The form will be provided to you in Excel format. However, if you prefer to use a report using a CSV format, just notify ISO of that, and they will provide you with the specifications you need to submit the data in that format instead. Now, remember that although this is a consolidated data call, you do need to separately submit your completed reporting forms to the New York portal for state reporting purposes. Submitting it to Treasury doesn't satisfy. We don't send it on to New York. Submitting it to New York, they don't send it on to Treasury. So you do need to essentially hit send. It will be the same form. Or what you complete will be the same document, but you do need to send it to these two separate places to make sure you satisfy all the requirements. And keep in mind there, and this happens occasionally, if you submit a form and some sort of error is determined. I mean, there is some validation exercises that take place, and it could be that some errors have been identified that you are asked to fix. If you do that and you, for example, send Treasury a updated form, please make sure you do the same thing to the New York portal. We obviously want the same insurers submitting the same data at each portal. So with that, I'd like to ask, well, first both Mike and Aaron to give us a little bit of an update on what's going on with the reporting on both the Treasury portal and the state portal. Mike, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think you actually covered a bunch of the items I wanted to initially, which is okay. Just effective as of end of business yesterday, all small insurers who have submitted their registration for purposes of the data call have received their reporting templates within an encrypted email. If any of those individuals, companies from a small insurer standpoint, have not received it, have any issues accessing the secure email or accessing the SFTP site, they should reach out to us. And I think shortly that Sherry will be posting the appropriate information where to reach out to. But as you mentioned, yes, if there's a resubmission that's required for the FIO side, as well as the NEAC side, companies and entities have to report that information to both the ISO side as well as the New York portal for consistency purposes.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Aaron?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I don't have much new to add, but as Richard mentioned, state regulators do continue to work in conjunction with Treasury on this joint data call, with data from insurers being sent to both entities. So for state insurance regulators, that data will be sent to the New York State portal as it has been in prior years. I would note we're still receiving final approval, so state regulators have not yet sent an email to company contacts as we have done in the past, but insurance companies should expect the process to be the same as in prior years, with those files being sent to both entities. As I mentioned, for state regulators, that being through the New York portal. That's really all I have. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, good. All right, well, moving on.
We do have one question, and
okay.
I believe I'm interpreting this correctly. If an insurer just is submitting to the New York State portal, does that satisfy all reporting requirements?
No, it is not. I think you basically, you fill out the form and you basically have to submit it to New York State, but you separately have to submit it to the ISO portal. I mean, basically, we both get, both the state regulators through the New York portal and Treasury get the same data sets, but we keep them separately. Other than that, you don't have to do anything to the forms differently, other than I think you are instructed to give different naming conventions as you submit them to each portal, but the actual documentation, the actual data within the form is identical. So once you complete it once, you basically submit it separately to the two portals, but submitting it to one doesn't satisfy submitting it to the other. Also on a sort of general topic before we get to the specific templates, workers' compensation, because that's subject to some special rules. Again, as has been the case in prior years, if you write workers' compensation insurance, most of the information for the workers' compensation fields on these forms will be submitted on your behalf by NCCI, the California Workers' Compensation Insurance Rating Board, and the New York Compensation Insurance Rating Board. NCCI will also coordinate with rating bureaus in the states where it does not operate. So Treasury does get comprehensive nationwide information on many of the workers' compensation fields, which does relieve insurers from having to fill in those portions of the field. Basically, what we do is we get those reporting individually, on a company by company basis, and then we're in a position to sort of merge those together, and gives us a full data set. Now, although workers' compensation writers are not required to submit certain data elements, keep in mind that NCCI and the rating bureaus will not register for the data call on your behalf, and everybody's got to register because not everything is done by the rating bureaus, nor will they complete certain questions relating to particularly workers' compensation exposure on the reinsurance worksheet. So as a result, if you are a workers' compensation monoline insurer, you can't just sort of not do anything on this. You do have to register, and you will have some fields that you need to fill out, particularly on the reinsurance worksheet, or otherwise we don't have complete information from you. So anyway, keep that in mind. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Now, if you have any questions as you collect your data and complete the reporting forms, your first port of call, I think, should be to review the instruction forms, the instructions for the small insurer form that you will be completing. Those instructions, and Sherry's brought them up on the screen, are on Treasury's website, and they basically contain, in addition to sort of some overview, general and specific guidelines, basically we go through each line by line, each element on each of the forms, and basically tells you, in hopefully comprehensive English, what it is we're looking for. And I would hope that if you take a look, if you have any questions about what any of the form descriptions is asking for, take a look at that. Hopefully that will answer any questions that you might have. Now, we also have a document also on the Treasury website, and Sherry, you can go ahead and close out of that. Let's go to that reporting document. If you see the selection of sample fact patterns, that is essentially, if you click there, you get another sort of form that or sort of cheat sheet, I guess I'll call it, basically walks through a number of ways that you would need to report various aspects of the program, particularly things that might not be intuitive, particularly things involving multiple lines and how you account for that and what have you. So, that's also something worth looking at, particularly if you're trying to figure out, well, where do I how do I report this when I've got stuff in multiple states, multiple lines, that sort of thing. So now I should mention with respect to this form, we prepared the examples in here using the non-small insurer form as an example. So if you look at this, for example, we don't collect number of policies from small insurers on the premium sheet, so you won't see that, and you won't have to respond to that. But the principles outlined here in terms of how to respond, particularly on the premium questions, are the same from form to form. So you should still find it instructive, I think. Now, if you still have questions after reviewing the instructions, you can obtain help in response to a specific question by emailing tripsection111data@iso.com. In response to this email, you'll get either a written email response or possibly a call from ISO or a call from somebody here at Treasury. Alternatively, you can directly call ISO or Treasury to ask your question. And I believe we've put in the chat, specific contact information for myself and the Treasury team and the folks at ISO as well. So again, we certainly want to try to make this as painless for you as possible. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You've got multiple resources here to do that, and we are certainly happy to help. So I think with that, I would like to turn to the actual small well, actually, they don't, Sherry is highlighting, there is a zip code listing here. That's something small insurers do not have to fill out the form. There's a geographic exposures form that small insurers do not need to fill out. So as a result, you will see that on our website. If you're wondering what that's about, it's something that gets filled out by alien surplus lines insurers, captive insurers, and non-small insurers, but small insurers do not need to complete that aspect of the reporting. So good news, you could ignore that. So going on, the small insurer form. And here it is, and we will just sort of walk through that. Again, try to provide some further explanation as to what we're seeking to get and maybe some suggestions on completing it. Again, as we indicated, if you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat. We'll try to address those as we go along. Now, after you've submitted your registration with ISO, you will receive copies of live Excel reporting templates through the portal that we visited a few minutes ago. ISO will tailor your spreadsheets based upon your reporting needs, including providing the separate worksheets you need for each of your jurisdictions. But for today's webinar, I'm just going to be going over the PDF versions of those standard forms that are on our website, which are a little easier to navigate for something like this. So just keep in mind that when you actually get the individual Excel spreadsheets, they may look a little different, but I don't think that will throw you in any way. The first spreadsheet, insurer group affiliations. The purpose of this worksheet is really just an identification mechanism. It identifies the entities you are reporting for, whether that's a group with its individual company components, or if you happen to be a single company that has no affiliated other companies, you would just fill it out for the single company. And again, everybody needs to fill this out, even if they only write comp, because again, we need to get you into the system. You'll see here for identification purposes, we use NAIC codes, both on a group and company basis for tracking purposes. That's in column B. If for any reason there's alien surplus lines insurers within a group you're part of, those entities should use the number assigned to them by the International Insurers Department of the NAIC. If you are an insurer that doesn't have a number, whether from the NAIC for whatever reason, ISO will assign you a number for tracking purposes. Basically, if you have reported before, you will basically use the same company identification numbers that you have used in prior years. Now you'll see on the right of the form, you need to report your 2022 TRIP eligible lines premium. That's in columns G and H, using the same number that you reported for state. Well, using the number, but basically the number you reported last year in the TRIP data call. Again, the reason we ask this here is because it essentially measures who's a small insurer or not, making sure we're the right people are filling out the right forms. Again, your TRIP eligible lines premium in 2022 is the measure of your deductible in 2023, which again is the focus of the data call this year. And hence, that's why we need to see that information there. The other figure, of course, is the policyholder surplus that you should report in 2022. You should again report that for the way you did for state statutory reporting as well. If you reported a figure on the TRIP eligible lines premium in 2022 last year that you now believe to be an error based on further evaluation, please enter the revised number in this year. The other sort of caveat here, if there actually are any insurers that didn't have any TRIP eligible lines DEP in 2022, for example, you're a startup or new operation and weren't writing in 2022, the instructions provide, as per the rules of the program, for essentially for you to put in an estimate here based upon your 2023 TRIP eligible lines DEP. The bottom line is that even if you just started writing TRIP eligible lines insurance in 2023 and thus had no prior year premium upon which to base a deductible, you will still have a TRIP deductible, and there will be no zero deductibles based upon when you factor in these alternative calculation methods. Now, moving to the next sheet, which is the direct earned premium sheet. Here is where you report your direct earned premium by relevant NAIC line or subline. Remember that when reporting your premium, although TRIP is defined in most part with reference to the NAIC state reporting lines, there are some significant differences. Principally, NAIC lines 1 and 2.1 for fire and allied lines up at the top of the form. Those for state purposes will include both commercial and some personal lines coverage, but only the commercial portion of this coverage falls within TRIP, and you should exclude any personal lines premium from your calculations when doing the reporting. So it wouldn't be exactly what you wouldn't necessarily be exactly what you reported for state purposes. Similarly, if you write professional liability and errors and omissions coverage, which normally would be reported for state purposes under other liability, those specific categories are excluded from TRIP. So for purposes of this data call, you would also exclude any professional liability and E&O coverage from what you report in that the line 17 figure there. So don't report that here. The instructions actually do identify the differences between the TRIP lines and the NAIC state reporting lines. So please feel, you can certainly refer back to those to make sure that you're, properly accounting for everything. Now, please also remember that, again, if you write workers' compensation policies, and again, that's in line 12 of the form, NAIC line 16, that will be filled out for you, or you can leave that blank because that will be reported in for you by NCCI and the other rating bureaus. But again, you'll see we also do collect excess workers' compensation. That is not information that the rating bureaus have. So if you do write excess comp, you do need to fill that in. Now, in column D, your total TRIP eligible lines DEP, that will auto-populate and will be based on the sum of what you report in columns E, F, and G, which will break down your policies based upon whether terrorism risk insurance coverage was declined, provided for no cost, which is column F, or provided for a premium that was charged. If you do provide a number in column G because you are charging some specific premium associated with terrorism risk insurance coverage, then in column H, which is the last column on the page, that you should report in there the actual amount that you did charge for terrorism risk premium. And so hence column H will be a subset of column G, which will show the overall premium of those policies. Premium should be entered on a direct earned basis for calendar year 2023. This means that if you have a policy that started before 2023 or ended after 2023, you should only include the premium earned in 2023 for that policy. If a policy covers multiple states, the premium should be allocated to each state proportionally in the same manner that you would have reported it for state reporting purposes. Now let's, and I think that's really it for that one. Let's go down to the next form. This is the standalone terrorism template. Here, you will provide information about any standalone policies you have which cover terrorism. Now, this is going to cover policies that offer coverage only for terrorism risk. Policies that cover risks in addition to terrorism risk would only be included on the previous page for reporting direct earned premium. If you actually are part of the market, though, that will write a policy that just covers a policyholder for their terrorism risk and not for any other associated risks, then that's what gets entered in on this sheet as well. But keep in mind that if you do enter standalone, if you do write these standalone policies, that premium also gets reported on the prior premium worksheet as well with whatever the appropriate information is. So again, the premium entered on the standalone worksheet would be a subset of what you report generally on the premium worksheet. You will see on here that for comparative purposes, we are asking you for information on policies that provide coverage for acts of terrorism certified under TRIA. That's in line 4. As well as policies that provide coverage for other acts of terrorism that are not subject to TRIA, and that's on line 5. You know, we were basically doing that for comparative purposes. So data on this one, unlike the prior premium sheet, is reported on a nationwide basis. So you no need to specify what particular state this might have been issued in. However, on this one, and this is in addition to DEP, you do need to provide information on the number of policies you issued and information on the exposure, limits exposure and limits of liability on here. So, okay, moving to the next one. Next is the cyber worksheet. Now, for those of you who've done this before, you may recall there were a number of expanded areas of inquiry that were introduced for the first time in the 2022 data call. Those categories have not changed for this year. So basically, there were a couple tweaks to the cyber in terms of how you could report the information in 2023. This year, the reporting is the same as it was in 2023. So just sort of walking through this, again, we ask you to divide the reporting between standalone cyber policies, that is to be reported in column C, as well as cyber endorsements attached to another policy, or what sort of generally known as package policies, that gets reported in column D. So, and then basically the figures you report in C and D will auto-populate in column D. There you should just get a total figure with the formulas that are in there. Keep in mind that do not provide any information on any sort of non-affirmative or silent cyber coverages that might appear, whether intentionally or not, in your policies. To the extent a policy may cover some sort of cyber loss because cyber is not specifically excluded in the policy, we are not seeking any information on that. We are only asking you to report information on cyber affirmatively written cyber insurance. All right, moving down lines 3 through 6, 8 to 9, and 18 to 19. Request information concerning the premium, number of policies, and limits for cyber policies in the TRIP eligible lines of insurance. We've been actually requesting this information since we started collecting cyber insurance on these policies in like 2017 or so. So again, continue to respond to these questions as you have in the past. It's all pretty straightforward. Lines 7, 10, and 20 now request that same information concerning premium, number of policies, and limits, but as applied to cyber policies written in non-trip eligible lines of insurance. Now you'll note in previously instructed you don't report information on stuff that isn't trip eligible. Here we do ask you to report information on cyber written in non-trip eligible lines, because in 2022 we expanded the call to cover this, basically so that we could assess the amount of cyber insurance that is currently not subject to the program, to make sure that we have a full picture of that. Our understanding is that this will largely be cyber insurance that you might be currently coding, characterizing, and otherwise reporting for state purposes as professional liability insurance, which, as I noted, is subject to an exclusion under TRIA. Again, if you are doing that, while you wouldn't have reported that premium in the prior premium worksheets, here for cyber purposes, we do want you to report that in these non-trip eligible lines fields, and please report it the same way as you do for the trip policies. Also in 2022, we began requesting certain of categories of information divided by size of policyholder. You'll see lines 12 to 17 in particular. We actually, for that, and we have categories of policy orders: small, medium, and large. The form specified the buckets that those go in. You can either do that by the revenue of the policyholder or the number of employees of the policyholder. You can elect to report that either way, but don't mix and match. So if it's easier for you to do the allocation by number of employees, do it that way. If it's easier to do it by revenue, do it that way. Don't go mixing, matching on us, because then we don't have an ability to sort of figure out what's going on. And Mike, could you just speak briefly to how we ask you to track that in terms of the way we get the forms out?
Absolutely, Richard. Thank you. So as you receive your response to your registration, you will receive the SFTP instructions. The cyber workbook will have a .z included, which is by default. So if you're going to report based on number of employees, you're going to replace the Z with an E, versus the revenue, replacing the Z with an R, as you submit your data back to us through the SFTP account. So that will allow us to differentiate if you're reporting under the employee number component versus the revenue component as requested by Treasury.
Yeah, and just so, we were actually requested by OMB to, when we liberalized the reporting on this last year, to, basically in response to requests to do that, we were allowed to do it, but we were only allowed to do it if we maintained a way of tracking how companies were doing it, just to make sure that if there do emerge any issues with respect to the data, we'll know where those are arising from. So please pay attention to that, and please make the appropriate designation so we can see what's going on. Also beginning, and this is as you continue down on the sheet, we also now request information on basically limits specific to cyber extortion and ransom payments, as well as loss information specific to cyber extortion and ransom payments. No changes to the form this year from last year. Again, the distinction we draw here between cyber extortion generally, which again, we understand can include many policy benefits apart from payment or reimbursement of an actual ransom payment, versus limits for the actual ransom payment itself. To the extent, your policies do not erect any distinction. So for example, if you issue a you have a cyber extortion coverage and the same general limit applies to the policy benefits generally as would apply to the obligation to pay or reimburse a ransom, then simply report the same limit. On the other hand, if you are sublimiting the ransom payment, or conversely the other way around, I guess, if you're sublimiting it, if there's a difference, please identify that just so we can see what's going on there. So and again, we are requesting this separately as between policies in the TRIP versus non-TRIP eligible lines. Now, finally, this last category, and if you go down to the next page, Sherry, of this, there's questions on loss information specific to cyber extortion and ransom payments. Here we are asking you simply to report it for all policies combined, whether in the TRIP eligible lines or not. So we didn't see a need to divide it out on this one. The questions here seek paid and incurred amounts for cyber extortion generally, as well as paid amounts for ransom payments, along with the number of claims such ransom payments are associated with. Finally, direct defense payments for cyber extortion generally, again, without any effort to segregate that to ransom payments specifically, are sought as well, again, on a paid and incurred basis. We can address or respond to further questions either at the end of the remarks, or certainly if you want to reach out to us specifically, if you've got any specific questions on this, if you would like to contact us separately. Okay, moving on to the next form, which is exposure bases by jurisdiction. Now we're asking you to report, and again, we're basically looking for your exposure, your limits exposure. Again, as with reporting direct earned premium, you'll be providing the data based on NAIC reporting lines, and again, report the information where terrorism coverage was provided versus where it was not. Again, the purpose here is to calculate total potential exposure under the policies. In other words, the most you might have to pay under the policy in question. Now, this worksheet also asks you to specifically identify policy limits where nuclear, biological, chemical, or radiological, or NBCR risks are not fully excluded. So this is requested for both property and liability exposures. So if you see column D, you will be providing policy limits of property policies where terrorism risk insurance is provided generally. Then in column E, you will then look at that same universe of policies and report policy limits for only those policies where NBCR coverage is not completely excluded from the policy. If there are NBCR sub-limits in place, those should be reflected accordingly in the exposure reporting column E. So I would think by definition, column E should be a subset of the figure identified in column E. Same reporting method would be used in columns I and J to report limits of liability. So I suppose if, even if you provide terrorism risk insurance limits, but you literally wholly exclude all limits for any NBCR risk exposure entirely, then the figures in column E would actually be a 0. But to clarify on that, what we're asking you to do, and this is basically to try to get some good information, but not make the reporting too difficult. If the policy provides terrorism coverage for any type of NBCR exclusion, even if you have some exclusions in there, then you would reflect that as a limit and include that as not excluding NBCR. So in other words, if a policy explicitly excludes nuclear risks, but provided coverage for chemical or radiological or biological risks, you would record the limits available for that in column E and J respectively. On the other hand, if, the wording of your policy totally excludes, that exposure, but you're in a state that has so-called fire following laws, and particularly obviously for the fire line, that might require the extension of coverage for an NBCR event, whether it's excluded or not, do not report that as a limit covered there. We have a way of figuring that out. Otherwise, we're really asking you to look at your policies and tell us what does the policy provide as per its terms, and don't interpret what it might actually have to provide otherwise based on certain state law requirements. You'll see here, and looking at columns F and K, we also request information on policyholder deductibles or self-insured retentions, which is also the same as we have done in prior years. These should be reported in connection with primary level policies that reference a policyholder deductible or a retention obligation. Don't do this in connection with, if you happen to be reporting in connection with high-level excess policies that sit above another, for example, that might sit above a primary policy that has a policyholder deductible or retention in it. The point being is, if a bunch of insurers in a tower all reported the same policyholder retention, we would get a whole lot of double counting, and that's not what we want to do. So don't do that if you're talking about a high-level excess policy. If the policy contains multiple deductibles or self-insured retentions within a state, depending on the property, location, or type of operation, use the lowest deductible or self-insured retention within that state, and use the same logic when filling out the exposure worksheet for the United States as a whole, and use the overall lowest deductible or self-insured retention for the policy. Now, I'd also like to review some of the differences in how exposure information should be reported as compared to premium. First of all, we'd like you to report your exposure information on a per occurrence basis. Next, whereas you would divide premium information proportionally by jurisdiction, for exposure, we want you to report the relevant limit for each jurisdiction, even if an aggregate cap on the policy might cap your exposure across multiple jurisdictions. So, for example, if you had one policy providing $1 million of coverage in 2 states, let's say California and Oregon, you would report $1 million of exposure on each of the California and Oregon worksheets, even though the policy had a single overall limit of $1 million. Now, you also need to fill out a U.S. worksheet, which aggregates all of your policies together. In this example, on the U.S. worksheet, you would provide the overall aggregate policy limit and take into account any limits that might apply across multiple jurisdictions. In the example I just gave, $1 million would be the overall U.S. exposure because it is a single policy providing $1 million in coverage. Now, as a reminder, if the policy has a single occurrence limit, use that single occurrence limit. If there is no single occurrence limit, use the policy's aggregate limit. Another difference between the DEP director and premium spreadsheet and this exposure spreadsheet is that you should be calculating exposure based on policies that were in force on December 31, 2022. Now, this differs from the premium worksheet, which basically asks you to include all premium earned in, I'm sorry, that I misspoke. The exposure of all policies that were in force on December 31, 2023. Now at the end of last year, that's the date you basically look at your portfolio and tote up your exposure figures and report them. Now, this differs from premium, which asks you to report all premium earned in 2023, even if the policy expired before December 31. So again, on the exposure worksheet only, if a policy terminated before December 31, 2023, you should not include that policy in your calculations, even though some of the premium for it may well factor in on the premium worksheet. Once again, the rating bureaus will provide payroll information for workers' compensation. That's in column N. But again, you will still need to provide payroll information for any excess workers' compensation policies, since they don't have that information. Sherry, next form. And this is the places of worship template. This form collects data on the availability and affordability of terrorism risk insurance for places of worship. This year's worksheet remains the same and is requesting that data be reported on a nationwide basis and categorized by property, liability, and workers' compensation policies. We only want information on policies written for the places of worship themselves. So when you are reporting this data, please do your best only to report coverage related to actual houses of worship and exclude any affiliated religious organizations such as hospitals or schools that you might be covering. You'll see that we've asked you to report this information under a specific industry code, and these codes we have selected are what we deem to be the closest fit to capturing the sort of actual places of worship. We are aware that different insurers use different systems for classifying their policyholders. So we provide you with the option to report your data using one of the following, either NAICS codes, SIC codes, or ISO class codes. If you can report your information using one of these classification systems, please do so. If you can't, but you have another way to extract this data, such as a policyholder name search, please do that instead. You will see that there is no category for unavailable or unknown, because we need specific data on places of worship pursuant to a request from Congress that we received on this category. So we do ask that you find a way to report actual or estimated information for your policyholders within this sector. As with many of the other spreadsheets, the workers' compensation elements on this form will be completed by NCCI, California WCIRB, and the New York Bureau, so you won't be required to complete the workers' compensation fields to the far right of the worksheet. All right, now, Sherry, you can go down to reinsurance. The final final worksheet is on reinsurance. You will need to answer these questions for your private third-party reinsurance protection. So do not, and we're aware many particular groups may have intra-company reinsurance arrangements in place for various capital requirements or what have you. Please do not report any intra-company arrangements that you may have in place. We are only looking for you to report in here true third-party reinsurance arrangements that you have in place with, unaffiliated entities. We strongly recommend that if you have an individual responsible for reinsurance in your company, that you forward this worksheet to them for completion. This will help ensure the accuracy of the data we receive. In addition, when responding to this worksheet, we need you to enter actual figures in column C, the response figure. We do get, more often than we would like, basically companies that have complicated reinsurance programs, and they basically put a C-attached spreadsheet or form, and then they will attach something that they upload to ISO. That's not helpful to us. We really need you to we understand programs are complex. Having said that, we need you to come up with a single answer and basically put in what you consider to be the best answer that most accurately characterizes your program as a whole, for what, the limit or the retention or what have you. Alternatively, put in the lowest figure, particularly for the retention. We want you to, in terms of where the reinsurance triggers, but please don't put in see attached form, because the bottom line is we won't see it. So if you have any questions about completion of this, again, we're happy to go over that with you. So please direct them either to our team at Treasury or to Mike's team at ISO. Now, also on this particular sheet, all insurers on this one need to answer the workers' compensation questions here. And you will see here as you go down, there's various questions on the reinsurance you might have in place for workers' comp, particularly for terrorism risk insurance for workers' comp, because the rating bureaus simply do not have information on your reinsurance purchases. One data field I also want to highlight here is we do request information for reinsurance purchases for natural catastrophe losses. Obviously, we're not a natural catastrophe program. We ask for this to basically make the comparison against what folks in the market are getting for Nat Cat versus terrorism. Obviously, we know there's availability issues in the market, perhaps on both, and knowing what reinsurance is getting obtained for one versus the other is certainly very important to the analytical work that we do. You also see there's a question at the bottom about any additional terrorism exclusions that apply to your reinsurance contract, separate apart from the question we ask about domestic and foreign exclusions, which appear at lines, looks like lines 12, actually 12 and 13. The question, and that's in line 26, it's meant to capture situations that exclude risks at particular locations or within particular metropolitan areas. And then we do give you, I mean, that's an area if you wanted to sort of describe what's being excluded, that sometimes that information is helpful to us. So with that, that is all I have on the, last but not least, is the Trustee Paperwork Reduction Act legend, which is on all of our forms. And at this point, if anyone has any further individual questions, I'm happy to answer those. And you can either put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask them, you can do that too. So anything else?
Hi, this is Carrie Higgins. I have a quick question for you on the places of worship.
Yeah.
We have religious organizations that have some policies, say, for religious books that are ocean cargo. And we have some agency or some religious places of worship that the policy includes not only the church, but also an affiliated school. What's your recommendations for policies like those two examples?
Well, certainly on the books, I mean, I think you could ignore that. We're not, I mean, look, Congress put this in here. There was a concern that places of worship, whether places of worship were in a position to get terrorism risk insurance. I mean, attacks on churches, attacks on synagogues, that sort of thing. I mean, Congress really wanted to know what's the information on that. I mean, frankly, the information has been pretty good that most places of worship do get terrorism risk insurance for their facilities. I mean, look, the school is a harder thing. I mean, if it's a school that's, I guess the best thing to do is if you were in a position to do an allocation, that would be good. If not, then I would, because it does include the place of worship, I guess I just report the whole thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Richard, we have a question in the chat.
Okay, and we have 3 companies that only issue workers' comp. We did not register them last year, but they would not complete any of the workbooks. Well, yeah, if you're only writing workers' comp, basically what you have to do, you got to go in, you got to register, you will get some forms. You basically don't have to fill out anything on the forms except for, well, you have to fill out the first form on affiliations, because we want to know who you are, but then you also need to fill out the last form on reinsurance, because there's nothing on the reinsurance worksheet Yeah, I mean, as Mike put, it's basically affiliations and reinsurance. For small insurers, I believe the rating agencies literally report everything else for small insurers. The one other caveat on that, I mean, there are some questions on excess workers' comp. So if you've got, if any of your companies are issuing excess workers' comp, there are some questions on that scattered here and there. You would be required to put that in. But other than that, it's pretty minimal. But it's minimal, but we do need you to register. We do need you to fill out that affiliations page, and we do need you to fill out the reinsurance page, plus the excess workers' compensation questions. Other than that, you're good to go. Anything else? Well, hearing nothing, I'm going to thank everybody for their attention. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out, and good luck with the reporting. Thanks very much. Have a great day.